this is a clear change, but the change is gradual. There were already some subordinate laws before which were going into a direction. And if we look into the 2025 changes, we see a clear direction towards more normalizing alcohol. Alcohol is becoming a normal part of Thai life when it was less so under the old law. This is not a change of all or nothing. It is just a direction which in my view is partly a wrong direction because we will lose some of the public health benefits which were in the old law. Having said that, of course there are some positive parts of this new law, but the overall trend is in the wrong direction. Very clearly, Thailand has more than 30 million tourists. It is an important factor of Thai economy. On the other hand, every law has to make a balance between the people in Thailand and how they are affected and the tourists. I have my problems with the argument that tourists need alcoholic drinks in the afternoon because it's 40 degrees. If they so much need it, it's usually in the hotel they can buy alcohol. What happens, however, is the law will affect everybody. It will affect the small corner stores. It will affect thousands of stores, and that will lead to higher consumption in the afternoon when there's no good public health reason for this afternoon consumption. So, this law is currently a trial law. We should really study it. We should have good evidence at the end of the 180 days, or the Minister of Public Health, I've heard, wants to have it even quicker. And we should actually have good data to show what is at stake. Because if we can say, okay, this has increased the traffic fatalities in the afternoon by so and so many deaths, then people can actually make a judgment and a decision on the permanency of this law based on real data and not based on, oh, it won't hurt us too much, a lot of other countries have it, and for tourists it's good. We need both. We need to know how important is it for tourists and what are the effects on the rest of the population. And once we have those data, then we should revise or make a final decision. At this point, we have speculation against speculation. Of course, we know that more availability will have some effects, but we have to quantify those effects so people can make this informed decision. Let me start with, as you said, this is a signal, a moral shift. And it's another signal to show the public that alcohol is now part of mainstream. It's part of main Thai life. It's no longer different. It's no longer an unordinary commodity. There are no longer bounds. So this is a signal, and signals, of course, are perceived by the public. And they see, okay, alcohol seems to be normal. Why do we care? Secondly, it should have some very clear consequences on how we treat industry. If industry, by their constitution, needs to maximize the shareholder profit, then they should not be in a decision-making body of public health. Because so often the maximization of shareholder profits leads to consequences which are bad for public health. So why would you invite somebody who, by their role, is bound by a different goal to actually be part of a decision-making body to increase public health? That is in itself a contradiction. And that means as soon as they go into the stock market, we should disinvite them from any committees which deal with public health. And thirdly, for the research part, this is a very difficult question, but I would expect now that there will be more exploration on maximizing the profit. And these may lead to different venues. For example, in the last 3 years, alcohol industry has a lot invested in cannabis industry. If you don't have shareholder values, you're way less bound to explore all of those things. And some of those things are actually completely detrimental to public health. And so I would worry and would actually regularly monitor industry activities to be sure what's happening. We are in a world now which is governed by information technology, new ways. We have to constantly adapt. And we also have to basically see what is happening in the next few months and react to that and then shape our subordinate laws to actually make this distinction clearer. We know from several countries who have complete bans on marketing, some in Europe, Lithuania and Norway. They have good experiences where to draw the line. And it's very clear that if you are doing a lot of media content and you're doing it from your kitchen and in your background there happens to be a wine glass from last night or whatsoever, that's a completely different situation than you see arranged two people enjoying themselves and saying, oh, this is such a beautiful Bordeaux wine and we like it, and this taste is, that is already suspicious. And there are formulations which are tested in laws in other countries which help us make this distinction sharper. But all of this is culturally determined. Basically, I would not expect a lot of influencers in Thailand talk about Bordeaux wine. Different countries have different styles and different ways how to promote. And it is very clear that you can make laws which would forbid that, and we should learn from those countries who have actually made this distinction, and there's good research that they succeeded in doing that. We should get those principles and then shape the subordinate laws. First of all, as I said before, if you have alcohol beverage companies which are traded at the stock market and which have rules, and those rules are in direct conflict of interest of certain regulatory bodies, they should step down because they cannot enforce their own rules, or they impact their own rules on the state as a whole, and that is of course bad for the whole. So there's good reasons why alcohol industry is not part of those regulatory bodies in other countries. And the right thing to do is that they would step down, given that they are now officially in a certain new legal frame. Secondly, what needs to be done is that if this situation persists, we need the transparency. And the transparency would clearly dictate some rules which could make it open to the public on what has been said and why. In terms of the question about the evidence, we just have to examine how alcohol industry has been arguing in parliaments the last 10 years in different parliaments. What statements were actually being supported by evidence and what were not. And from my experience, and I've been to a lot of parliaments in the last 10 years, I can tell you that a lot of what they say in parliament is not evidence-based. They say things like, oh, in Europe, more than 30% of the alcohol is unrecorded. There are no data from that. Absolutely, categorically, no data. This is just one example, but I can tell you a lot of examples where they just throw in statements which look evidence-based, because if you have a number, I would never dare say 30% if I don't have a number and a calculation which actually says 30%. But they know that they're not questioned in a lot of those gremia, and that will be the case. And so I have my fears that the public health evidence base will erode, and we are coming into, he said, she said, and no longer have a benchmark of reality, a benchmark of true evidence against what he said or she said can be measured to make a better decision. And that is another problem I'm seeing with industry, and I see no way how they're going to change, because they haven't changed the last 20 years. Early warning signs means very clearly that we have to restrict ourselves to immediate effects of alcohol. One of the most immediate effects of alcohol is that it changes your psychomotor abilities, which is affecting injuries. So injuries is one of the biggest and quickest signs that there may be changes in public health. And I would very clearly recommend to focus on injury and emergency rooms, focus on immediate effects, which could be public disorder and other things, focus on those chronic diseases which are most clearly affected by heavy drinking episodes. That would be effects like the Monday effect of cardiovascular, but it could also be liver disease. Liver disease actually develops over a long time, but we have clear evidence that changes in availability and changes in drinking act very quickly and can basically constitute the last drop for the thing to go over. Let me give you one example. When the Germans invaded France, they confiscated all the wine. And the liver disease mortality of the French were drastically reduced. The next month it started the reduction. So basically, if you have some of those early markers, and you should concentrate on those. Yes, alcohol causes cancer. It's a very severe public health problem, but it's not a problem for evaluation of a new law in the next 2 years. forget it. Forget anything which is more long-term. And you should also not only concentrate on administrative data. Yes, we do have administrative data, but there are a lot of small and little points in the new law which can only be explored quickly by asking people, by constructing surveys. And actually the surveys should have been undertaken, the baseline should have been undertaken before the law, so see what is already in your surveys, but then as soon as possible get specific questions on those specific topics which are in the new law. As an international researcher, Thailand was always one of the stellar examples. Why? Thailand had a relatively rapid increase in alcohol consumption until about the year 2000 or so. And especially since the year 2008, the alcohol consumption and the attributable harm was actually relatively stable and slightly declining. And for that, it was one of the few examples of a country which was a middle-income country who experienced the usual increase in alcohol consumption from coming from a poorer state into the middle income, but it was able to stop it. It did not go on. And that is something which distinguished Thailand from some of the surrounding countries, such as Vietnam, for example. What I'm trying to say is that WHO always said, okay, there are certain things which will happen once you transition in your time, but this is not God-given. You can stop it. And Thailand was always one of those examples. They were clever enough to stop the bleeding when it was still at a, well, too high, but still at an acceptable level. Way better than Vietnam or some of the other surrounding countries. And now I'm fearing that with all of those changes, gradually, this will not be a sudden process, but gradually Thailand will lose its edge and will increase and will, I mean, obviously it's also economically increasing and will come more into the 10 liters class and 10 liters and above class. And that's personal fear, and it's completely inevitable. It's completely, we can do something. It can be stopped. And I think in the evaluation of this new law and in shaping the subordinate laws, we should do everything to keep, to no further increase the alcohol consumption level and the harm level in Thailand. One of the main points, we have been talking about the Alcohol Control Act. It was very clearly focused on a lot of availability, marketing, and other restrictions. One should not forget that overall, over the past 20 years, especially also in those years from 2005 onwards, that alcohol taxation in Thailand has played a huge role in making sure that the consumption level did not increase further. And this can be up to 2-3 liters, which is just the reduction of taxation and fiscal measures in Thailand. And what we need is to keep on that tradition. Very clearly, the Alcohol Control Act is one thing, and it's very important, but taxation is another measure which is absolutely necessary to keep alcohol consumption not increasing. I've been shown a statistic in the last few days which is quite telling. Since the year 2000, if you look into the price of different commodities, things like vegetables or fruits have increased their price by 200%. Alcoholic beverages in Thailand have increased their price by 30%, meaning that is about 1/7 of the price increase of more healthy products. And this is already quite telling. And if we now do everything not to further increase the price of alcohol and to actually make this cleavage harder, we will pay the price, and the price will be the costs of more deaths, and the price will be that we overall have clearly more public health problems.